Hello, everyone. Welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. You know what this is. This is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and of course, critical thinking over magical thinking. If you don't know who I am your host, Leanne Lord. I am also a stand up comedian, and my comedy special Even More Funny Women of a Certain Age is now on Apple TV, Google Play, a whole bunch of stuff. So excited. I know I tell you every week because I'm excited about it every week. It is, I'm sure you know this, National Read a Book Month, which is fortuitous because our guest, Becky Ferreira, has a new book coming out this month, First Contact, the story of our obsession with aliens. Now, as I told her off screen, I've just returned from Dragon Con, which is one of the largest sci fi fantasy pop culture conventions on the planet. And I saw quite a few aliens, a few predators, some hobbits, a couple of Ewoks, and a tribble. But that's not science, that's science fiction. And with all due respect to Zephram Cochrane and my fellow Star Trek fans, popular culture has really sort of primed us to expect a slam dunk first contact moment. But a more likely scenario is some ambiguous atmospheric chemistry on a planet 500 light years away that may simply vex us for generations. But the search for alien life is entering a thrilling new phase as next generation telescopes and missions open unprecedented windows into distant worlds. That means we're likely to experience an avalanche of possible biosignatures that might point to alien life. The truth is out there, but it's not likely to be very forthcoming. In other words, if the aliens are out there, they're on the down low, y'all. Now, our guest will discuss how to manage our expectations about biosignatures and shift the conversation from certainty to probabilities as we embrace the search for life on its own enigmatic terms. Now, Becky Ferreira is a science reporter with bylines in all the best places: the New York Times, Wired, MIT Technology Review, National Geographic, and many more because there's always more. She writes the weekly science newsletter, The Abstract, for 404 Media. And First Contact, the story of our obsession with aliens, is her debut book, and it will be out on September 30th, 2025. Now, before I bring her to the screen, I just want to remind you that if you are joining us live, you have the amazing opportunity to ask questions about tonight's presentation by typing them into the Q&A box, because we're not new to Zoom, are we? And we will get to as many of them as we can. And now it is my absolute pleasure to welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents Becky Ferreira. Ta-da! You have the con, my dear.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm really excited to speak on this topic, and just excited to be in this amazing series. I know this is a topic that's on a lot of people's minds, so I'm looking forward to just diving into it. I'm gonna bring up my presentation here and share a screen, so hopefully that comes up. One sec here. Okay. Is that coming up all right?
Beautiful.
Okay, great. All right, aliens. Let's talk aliens. So obviously this is a topic that we could say has hype kind of built into it. I'll get to that in a second. But to start off, I kind of wanted to wind the clock back 15 years, and um, that was sort of when I was starting my career as a space reporter. And the big story then in exoplanet research was the Kepler Space Telescope. And that was really exciting, obviously, because it was just discovering thousands of worlds. And we're at a point now where I think about 6,000 exoplanets have been discovered. But even at that time, when I was talking to scientists, they were anticipating this new age of exoplanet characterization that was going to be coming down the line. Kepler was, discovering all this stuff, but soon we would have these telescopes that could isolate individual atmospheric constituents, possible biosignatures, things like that. And I think it's really exciting that now we're in that phase. It's kind of surreal to have been looking forward to it and looking forward to it. And now we're starting to see a couple tremors of what will be an avalanche. I'm sure maybe a couple, you're aware of this year, the K2 18b story about an exoplanet with a possible biosignature that then became very controversial. That's sort of, I think, the mold that will continue to happen only on larger and larger scales. Um, you have the exoplanet side of it. We also have these amazing astrobiological missions within the solar system, Perseverance on Mars, Dragonfly going to Titan, and Europa Clipper going to Europa. So there's that side of it. Perseverance has already found really interesting molecules that are just, again, ambiguous, but are exciting to actually have, the distant atmospheres of exoplanets, and then also this kind of like ground truth in our own solar system. And then I think maybe this caught me by surprise, maybe not everybody, but this new age of interstellar objects. And I don't think anyone really expected what a lightning rod these objects would be. But now we found three of these objects that have come from other solar systems in our solar system. So we have exoplanets, planets in our solar system, weird things coming from other solar systems into our solar system. And it's all kind of this confluence that's going to, I think, create a lot of really interesting observations and data. But it's going to be messy. And it's not, as Leanne said, it's not going to be most likely this kind of expectation that has been set by pop culture, where it's really fun to have hostile aliens come, or maybe like redemptive aliens come. We've got Predator and Superman even this summer. So you get all of this kind of, that's pretty unambiguous kind of signals of life. That's a smoking gun or a smoking death ray or whatever. So I made this kind of silly meme to illustrate the sort of difference in expectation of what the pop cultural landscape uh, is kind of setting us up for, and then the conversation within science. So it's like people are not expecting a possible biosignature in this way. They might be expecting something much more ambiguous, or sorry, much more unambiguous and real and corporeal, and perhaps even at Earth. So with that in mind, I wanted to kind of just ask the basic premise of my of my talk. Ask that question: can hope and height be fully separated in the search for alien life? Short answer, no. So that's my presentation. Just kidding. But I do actually think it's really important to focus on the fact that this will be an imperfect effort to try to communicate as best as possible a bunch of ambiguous results, a bunch of confusing results, having scientists debate in the open, in open press, like what each of these things means. For a casual reader who may be tuning in here and there, it's going to be very confusing. But that's like kind of, I think, the price we're going to have to pay for the fact that it's going to be a very different kind of alien life search than what the movies have set us up to expect. So I say all that just to kind of have a nod to the fact that there's like a huge public interest in this, always has been. One of the points I make in my book is that, when you think about how cultures personify the sky, see the sky as a canvas for stories, believe that there's hostile or redeeming presences of deities in the sky and things like that. That this is like a very old compulsion that we have, that we're not alone. We seem to really just have this kind of inbuilt in our hardware, this assumption, this hunch. So there's that side of it, that it just seems to be something quite innate. And then there's also the side that aliens mean a lot of different things to different people. Leanne was referencing the pop cultural side. You can't go to movies anymore without like half the cast being aliens. That's sort of like what blockbusters are now. So there's just like, we're very acclimated to the idea that aliens are going to be our peers or our invaders or our redeemers. And then there's people that believe that they've been communicating with aliens, or that they've been abducted by aliens, and they wouldn't be surprised to hear about a story about biosignatures, because they're like, that's my life, And then there's of course the very exciting scientific side of this, which is my focus. So I think it's important to just, with this subject, not only really take a nod to the just widespread interest, but also the kaleidoscopic diversity of opinion. And that's going to be all coming into this very strange media landscape. And I just think it's inevitable that there will be uh, there will be a lot of missed connections in that. But that having been said, I have a longer answer and some best practices that I've kind of put together from talking to other reporters and scientists. I'll get into all of these a little bit later. I wanted to start kind of by going back even further in time to a foundational story, which I think is very illustrative of what we're facing now. I think it's like kind of this interesting analog, and it is the Great Moon Hoax of 1835. Some of you guys might be familiar with this. This is, I just love this story. I never miss an opportunity to bring it up. Um, this is a story about a very famous sensational article, anonymously written at first, that claimed with scientific authority that a lot of aliens had been found on the moon in 1835, in the summer of 1835. Now, um, the backstory is really fascinating, but the upshot is that this was a huge hit. People loved the story. It became incredibly popular. Um, and of course, you may notice that there's not actually aliens on the moon. So it's kind of one of these first like initial testing grounds of how popular aliens can be, how much we want to believe, and also like a number of really interesting elements of how these stories propagate and the different forces like new media and financial incentives and grievances and things like that can play into these stories becoming really, really having a high valence and just traveling way farther than necessarily expected. So the story was basically that, they kind of buried the lead. It takes a while for them to get to this in the story, but we found a bunch of man bats in the moon. There's also these bipedal beavers. There's unicorns. It's just this whole other ecosystem is on the moon, and this six-part series in the New York Sun, a press at the time, just really caught fire. I put on the page here too the a book that is a really really great history of this whole hoax. Um, so as you can see from just this quote, it was just like really fanciful and funny. But the context was that in the 1830s, the penny press was kind of becoming this really big deal. And what it was a new type of newspaper that, as the name implies, only cost 1 cent. So this was like about 6 times cheaper than papers had been before. So it opened up this whole new audience. And suddenly there was a lot of casual readers who would buy these issues, and so editors and writers would market to them and often bring really sensational stories. And there was like really tough competition between these newspapers, so a lot of incentive to try to outdo each other in terms of like getting a story that's going to really light fire. So you have a new form of media with the penny press. You have this huge and engaged audience. With the New York Sun, it was New Yorkers originally, but it became much larger than that. And then, an anonymous fabulist with a grievance, which is very familiar, I think, today. So a someone who had kind of an axe to grind and didn't want to put his name on the initial stories. Financial incentives. These were very competitive papers. They were trying to outdo each other. There was really a real incentive to be as kind of wild as possible and take risks. And aliens, which is just, there are bestsellers about aliens that are 2,000 years old. This is just a subject that is made to be hyped up, which is why I kind of had that disclaimer at the beginning. You really can't fully separate the hype, but there's ways that you can mitigate things. So this story also had a very important element. It had scientific authority. Now, this was laundered scientific authority, but the story was couched very carefully as if it were a scientific paper from Sir John Herschel, who was probably the most famous astronomer, if not one of the most famous astronomers in the world, the son of William Herschel, and a really prolific figure in astronomy at the time. Now, he did not know that he was being credited with this. So it came as a total surprise to him that he had been used as this sort of figure of authority in saying that there were all these lunar man bats and unicorns and things like that. But in retellings of this story and how popular it became, a lot of people will be like, "Oh, this is a credulous public." But this is actually the middle thing, the middle picture I have here is the typeset from the actual penny press. And so you can see it really looks like it's a real scientific paper. It says it's published from the New York Sun, but it's from a supplement to the Edinburgh Journal of Sciences. They never quite say directly that Herschel said this, but I think that you can understand why people thought this was coming from him. And I really love the picture of him at the end of his life in 1867. I feel like that expression is something he probably made a lot in regards to this story because he thought it was kind of funny at first, but then he had to spend like the rest of his life kind of refuting it and having to say that this was not true. But the thing is, the story worked. It made the New York Sun incredibly famous, one of the highest circulations of any paper in the world. People were just really excited about it. And I think it's a good illustration of how all these elements can come together. And I think in unmasking the anonymous reporter who wrote this, his name was Richard Adams Locke. And he kind of was annoyed by a lot of these scientific papers that were coming out at the time because there was this advance in telescope technology and there was a lot of astronomers looking at the surface of the moon and at different planets and things like that. And they would speculate in wild ways. And he they would say we have evidence of like some kind of lunar structure that looks like it's inhabited or things like that. And he just thought, I'm just going to take this to the next level. If they're going to make these kind of speculations, I'm just going to make it explicit. So I think those are kind of all ingredients that you can see in stories today. And I put a little bit of these stories up, like a little hint of how it's been playing out in the last 200 years. I don't think this is inherently bad, by the way. Like a lot of scientists also want to believe in aliens. In the case of Percival Lovell, that's a very famous story. And I think it's like understandable when you're looking at the surface of Mars in great detail for the first time and seeing strange things to jump to that kind of conclusion. But this has kind of set the mold for a lot of the kind of conversations we've had about aliens ever since. I also think this story that's on the bottom here about the labeled release experiment from the Viking mission is really interesting. It's this kind of controversy over the results of that experiment are fascinating. And the designer of the experiment, Gilbert Levin, whose byline is there, he believed that we had actually found life on Mars for decades after that. So there's definitely a different kind of valence when the scientists themselves are the ones out there, both because I think people who trust science see that as an authority figure kind of um, you know supporting the idea that we found life somewhere. And then also for people who don't trust science that much, it gives them a foil. It gives something like Richard Adams Locke a reason to give someone like that a reason to take the next step and make fun of it or make a satire. So there's like all these ways in which when scientists actually become involved in this kind of speculation as well, that these stories can kind of become uncontrollable. And of course, like the Oumuamua alien spaceship story. I'm not even going to touch that with a 10-foot pole, but that is like the, example in the last 5 years of something just uh, getting its own, sort of propulsion from a scientist believing in really like purporting that there's this fringe theory that it's an alien spaceship. So I think we can expect more of that. And this is in some ways something that we've been adjudicating for a long time as science reporters and people in the science community. For many decades, there's been this very, of course, uh, active ufological kind of community, and those kind of claims get adjudicated on an anecdotal basis and things like that. So there is that side of it, but now these are going to have to be adjudicated on a scientific level, and I'm not sure the distinctions are always going to be clear to the public. So so I just think it's going to be a very interesting and kind of messy time. Um, so I wanted to highlight this amazing new generation of telescopes that's coming up here. I have on here TESS and the Roman telescope, the two space telescopes, JWST, Rubin, which just started, and ELT. So these are going to be bringing us a lot more amazing data. Obviously, with JWST, we're already seeing that it is able to um, you provide amazing insights into the atmospheric chemistry of distant worlds. I think Rubin will be very interesting because it will be able to find so many more interstellar objects. So, because we only have a sample size of three, and only one was very normal as a comet, and the other two are kind of weird. Like when we have a big survey of these interstellar objects, it will be a lot easier to kind of, or maybe not, maybe they will all be weird, but it will be we'll get a better sense of what is kind of passing through all the time in our solar system. And I think Roman is also going to be very interesting because it's very good at microlensing, which is a way of detecting exoplanets that's quite different from traditional ways of transit or the radial velocity method. And it will open up kind of a lot more insight into the kinds of planets that you're not going to be able to see normally, wide, planets with really wide orbits, rogue planets, Earth-like planets, things like that. So I think it's such an exciting time. I think we're going to be just bowled over with this new avalanche of really interesting findings. How do we deal with that? How do we get the right information out? Um, so that's the end of the pretty slides. These are just the boring slides now. but I do have a lot of thoughts on this, just based on reporting for the past 15 years. And I also want to give credit to a NASA workshop last year that I attended, called Communicating Life in the Universe. That was a sort of a discussion about how to uh, start to begin like best practices for communicating all of this kind of ambiguous evidence and how we should think about it. So that shaped some of my ideas for this. Um, the first thing is that I think it's going to be impossible to hold back information and not seem as if we're being secretive or gatekeeping information. I think in the past that has been deeply problematic. Now, obviously, you don't want to be sending out a bunch of preprints that are not peer reviewed. I think that process really needs to be looked at and like perfected and things like that. But I think when we're talking about the first rumblings of these biosignatures that we've had, in many ways, I think we're kind of already doing the right thing, even though it's confusing. Having something like the K218b story that broke earlier this year, where scientists from that team said this was, strongest signs of life yet. But then it kind of was challenged a bunch. And if you kind of just do a search for that planet on Google News, you will see like the debate playing out. This is the same thing that happened with the phosphine detection on Venus, and in a much more dramatic and controversial way with Oumuamua and the strange nature of that object. And I think we just have to embrace that. That I think it's an opportunity to bring people into the scientific process. And I've thought for a while that one of the ways that we as science communicators can try to rebuild trust and like invite people and engage people into the scientific process is to show some of that messiness, and to just like really highlight that scientists are still people. They have these priors and personalities and rivalries that can affect their views of how research is playing out. That doesn't mean that science as a whole is compromised on some level. That's the nice thing about having a system that's based on reproducibility. But I think that people are often can think of scientists as people who think that their authority is unquestionable, and that they're just kind of they have their research is just right away. And I try to, when I talk to the public, often emphasize that if you read any scientific paper, there almost always is a section about how limited the study was. Right? They scientists will offer the limitations of their study. They will offer the fault lines readily. They're not trying to say that this is the be all end all. Almost all studies have some kind of here, here's what we found, but here's where we need to go next, and here's the limitations. So I think we really just need to start embracing that there's messiness. I also think, you can point to all of these big scientific questions in the past that took so long to resolve, like continental drift and things like that. And find your touchstones that you think are interesting examples of when it really was, for a long time, just seen as anathema to the scientific community before something was accepted, or it could be something that the scientific community kind of embraced and then was found to be not, inadequate later. Like, I think all of this stuff is really interesting. And I also think, kind of priming people for the idea that this, a lot of questions, including the question of alien life, whether it exists, it may never be answered. We may never actually get any kind of solid answer. It could just be that planet 5,000 or 500 light years away that is just kind of interesting, and that's just, we have to live with it. Um, and I put that last point. I'm not saying that there's no risk of public confusion when you have a bunch of headlines saying that, oh, there's phosphine on Venus, it could be a sign of life. Oh, there's not. Oh, there is. Like, that is, for a casual reader, that's really like disorienting. But I think that's a better system than keeping everything until you have a really conclusive result. And even if that's like takes years, because that starts to feel like you're gatekeeping. Obviously, you put out the peer-reviewed study, like something like phosphine is I believe that was a Nature paper, so it went through peer review and things like that. But I also think it's fine to have a bunch of contrasting headlines. And I think in our reporting about this kind of stuff, we just need to really hammer home that that's part of science, and that's why it's fun. And eventually, these things are either reproduced or they're not. So my next slide here. Yes. So I think this is going to be this is something that science reporters and scientists already do, but we really need to be clear about what these nebulous terms mean. A possible biosignature does not mean a sign of life, and habitability does not mean inhabited. Earth-like does not mean exactly like Earth. Um, I think people that are really, very in, the deep into this world, they understand that kind of thing. But I think it can be confusing, and all these terms need to be defined a lot. And to that end, NASA and other agencies and other institutions are beginning to come up with tools like the biosignature assessment framework and the ladder of life detection, which kind of give an inside look into how scientists are adjudicating it. So if something is a potential biosignature, what's the likelihood that it could be geological in origin versus biological in origin? And I think we need more of those tools. And I also think they need to be more public, more friendly to the public. Like, I like the biosignature assessment framework and the ladder of life detection. They're both like these kind of ways of kind of assessing the odds of an actual biological origin for some biosignature. But I think, they are still a bit technical. And so I'm hoping that we can come up with some more ways to show to a general audience that these biosignatures have a very high standard that they have to pass before they're considered um, even like inconclusive evidence of life. So I hope that we can do that more and really bring people into that process as well. Use a lot of case studies and historical examples. I kind of alluded to that in the last slide with past debates, but I also think like things like debates over stromatolites and other early signatures on Earth, whether they are biological or geological in origin, are really helpful to be like, this is something we debate about on structures that are here. We haven't unraveled the mystery of how life arose on Earth. So this is very tangible. And I think that can be a really great way to show why it's so difficult to do kind of a slam dunk assessment of any kind of biosignature or technosignature. And yeah, and I think also, I'm not sure everybody understands in the public, like, just how high the standards have to be for something to come out in a paper like Nature or something like that. It's not just that we found some ozone or something like that, right? It really has to be uh, an atmospheric constituent that is hard to explain in another way. One of the things that's exciting right now is that it really is kind of pushing people to think about how these interesting atmospheric constituents and chemistry could be produced geologically. And I think it's always fine to emphasize the great inhospitality of the universe in general, right? Like, just we're all excited about the search for life, but I think it's worth taking a moment for the amazing drama of these incredibly hostile worlds that we find, and taking a moment for like just realizing how rare it is to have something that we would consider habitable in the parameters that we have defined that. Um, and yeah, and then showing consistency in communicating the results of the individual studies. I think this has been really good, especially in the Venus phosphine case, where the authors never said that this is a sign of life. Like, this was always couched in possible, possible biosignature kind of stuff. Um, to just always have those hedging kind of adjectives, potential, possible, and really make it consistent that scientists aren't saying that there's bacteria on Venus, right? This is just one interesting lead that needs to be followed up on. Um, this is the one that I'm really excited about because it's sort of what I started thinking about 15 years ago when I started realizing, like, we're going to have this holistic view. It's not going to be a binary. So, as we've talked about already, like, this first contact moment, even if it's not physically aliens coming to Earth, is often like imagined as very, um, there's the moment where we don't know if there's aliens, and then there's the moment that they're messaging us or they're here, and it's just, night and day. um, we're going to be entering this time of all of these possible, potential biosignatures, and we're going to have to move towards this view, I think, of this cosmic mosaic. And I think it could be really exciting because you're going to have all these different kind of comparisons you can make between different planets. And maybe you find a lot of planets that have a similar kind of atmospheric chemistry that is hard to explain geologically. Then you kind of have this iterative process where you might not ever have that slam dunk moment. They might all be planets that are just tantalizing and far away, and we can message them but we never hear back, but it looks like there's life, but that's just it. But if we have this wider tapestry, it starts to be a little easier to make assumptions and constraints about the odds of life elsewhere. And I think that's really exciting. Of course, there always could be a slam dunk kind of a case, and I think that would be very nice. But the universe is not known for being particularly forthcoming about its mysteries, and so I think trying to anticipate some of this stuff and thinking of new ways to communicate that this is a probabilistic kind of a issue rather than a binary is a good thing to practice for, because I think it's the more likely outcome in the coming years. Um, and then, oh yeah, fictional aliens as a treat. Okay, so this might be a little more controversial. I do think that fiction in science communication should be used very carefully and sparingly, because you don't want to give people the idea that you don't want to cloud people's idea of what alien life could be, because we just genuinely don't know, and I would assume that if it exists, it's stranger than we could possibly imagine. So in our stories, we have most fictional aliens that fall into monsters, saviors, peers, right? These are how our stories work in general. So aliens are just an iteration on older stories that are the same thing, where we're looking for a higher power to save us from ourselves, or we're scared of a higher power and what it could do, or we want connection. So you have your Star Treks, you have your World War of the Worlds, you have your Superman, and so they fall into those kind of categories. I think that we need to have much more stories that are about the unknown and tantalizing results, and things of that nature. I would actually love some suggestions if anybody has some. This is a much less popular type of story for alien lore, but Solaris is a famous example where the whole point is that it eludes interpretation. Annihilation is another one like that. To a certain extent, Arrival is, but even then, there's communication that is possible, even if it's opaque. But I honestly think that people should start writing speculative fiction about what it's going to mean if we can't um, fully know something, and if we just have all of these really interesting signals, but can't, finally close the deal on whether we make contact or not. So I kind of say that as an appeal to people who write speculative fiction to start writing more of it. And maybe I'm not aware of this already happening, but I would love examples of that, because I think it helps for people to have some kind of fictional analog or pop culture analog to compare to. I think you can also like use things like the X-Files, where you have a dichotomy obviously between Mulder and Scully, and you can use that dichotomy as like a way to think about skepticism and these sort, it's obviously very imperfect in the show. I wouldn't say that they make perfect scientific decisions or anything like that, but you know what I mean in terms of like bringing people in and using familiar characters to talk about the kind of ambiguity and the tantalizing nature about this. And I would say too, like humans are used to making these stories. They're not our favorite stories because we like to have things be certain. We like to just know. But we've had to, as we've evolved as a species, deal with the concept of death. What happens after our loved ones die? Deal with the concept of what's out there over the next horizon, including the frontier of outer space. So we tell stories about this a lot, and it's in a lot of our religious theology. And so I think that appealing to that within reason and carefully, so you're not kind of insinuating that fiction is real life or anything, but I think it will help people to sort of grapple with a much less satisfying, perhaps, maybe an anticlimactic version of the search for alien life that may not align with their expectations. Um, Here we are. Oh yes, this is my favorite. Invite participation. I people just love talking about this, and I think the best way to really communicate effectively is to bring people in. I there was just this week a study that came out about the exoplanet travel bureau campaign that NASA ran 10 years ago, in which they produced a beautiful series of retro posters that were like advertising exoplanet destinations. There weren't aliens in the posters, which was really smart. Like, it was meant to be like a way to envision the actual environments themselves. So I think things like that are really important because they bring in this artistic side. Um, and they kind of like help people to visualize these kind of frontiers in new ways. Um, and citizen science initiatives, I wish there were more of those. I'm not sure exactly what kind of shape it would take in the search for life, but I think there was a lot of these kind of citizen science efforts when Kepler was around, looking for, exoplanet data and Kepler data and things like that. I think that's really great stuff. Make games, really invite people into that process. Ask the public for feedback, and also to organize these in-person events and workshops and contests, tabletop exercises, things like that. I would love the idea of like having a event where different kinds of alien detections or ambiguous results are kind of given to a group, and they have to figure out how to communicate it. They have to figure out what the next steps are, because I think these questions are really interesting to everybody. So it would be interesting to invite them into it. Um, then the last but not least. Okay, so yes, all of this is very exciting. Uh, I know it's messy, and I think there's going to be a lot of challenges, but we're in this new phase now, and I included this quote I love from Carl Sagan. I'm sure many of us were raised on Cosmos. I certainly was. And I think about this all the time. When you're raised on Cosmos, you have Carl Sagan's voice occasionally just popping up in your head. But he really sells this line in one of the episodes of just how lucky we are to be in this time. The first moment when we are visiting other worlds. And that was in 1980. And now we're in this new phase where we're not only visiting other worlds, we're doing astrobiological research on our nearby planets. We're looking towards the exoplanets in the rest of the galaxy and being able to see amazing details. That is only going to get better. And I just think it's one of the reasons that like we should focus maybe on the unknown is that we're the inheritors of all of this yearning and longing, right? This is a question that is that has animated people for so many generations. So we're really just the next step in that yearning process of wanting to know. And so I think it's a really exciting time when a lot of those questions might not be answered, but will be constrained. And we will actually be able to learn a lot more about our universe, even if we don't find life. And that's just an exciting time. So my shameless plug, I have my book coming out, and I talk a lot more about all aspects of aliens. It's kind of meant to be a primer on every meaning of alien, and so I'm very excited to share that as well. But I hope this was informative, and I'm looking forward to speaking more.
Becky, thank you so much for that. There was a lot in here that I did not know. I guess because this is not my end of the pool, so to speak. I was not aware of the Great Moon Hoax of 1835. I feel like that was the clickbait of its time, perhaps
Yes,
maybe a
totally.
little TikTok crossover there.
Attention
Um,
economy, right?
and I feel like what was his name? Richard Adams Locke?
Yeah,
Yes? I feel like he was maybe with what he did, he was sort of maybe the forerunner of Orson Welles and War of the Worlds. You know, it's like, okay, we're gonna do this.
absolutely.
Yeah, we're gonna scare people. So they he catfished folks by using the name of the scientist, John Herschel. He said, I said, what? How awesome is that? Spend the rest of
Exactly.
your life going, I didn't say that, and no one's gonna really fully believe you. Um, I I um I like when you were going through the different approaches. This is what's hard for humans, and I think it's always been difficult for us, and more so now because we are so used to advancements happening so quickly in our lifetime. Humans didn't necessarily experience it this fast before, but when you said it can take decades to get answers, or maybe not even then, we struggle. Like,
Yeah,
I like I can get Uber Eats. Why can't I get all the answers
yeah.
to the great questions of the universe? And I had to tell you, I giggled, and I'm so glad I was on mute when you were talking about messaging the aliens, and then maybe we don't hear back. And then maybe we're not being
Fair.
ghosted. Maybe we're not
Yeah.
being ghosted by the aliens. They just didn't charge their phone. You know, that's happened to the best of us. They're like, hey, we want to answer these humans. They called, but like we didn't charge. I'm sorry, I'm being very silly right now.
I love
Um,
it.
but let me see. I did have another note. Oh, when you mentioned I'd never heard of the NASA exoplanet travel bureau campaign. I would have
Yeah.
loved to have done that if only for the frequent flyer miles.
Oh, wow. Can you imagine?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes, I
exactly.
can. I'd be in first class for the rest of my life just based on those miles. Um, but I was furiously taking notes. Thank you so much. And we do have some questions from folks, and this is where I have to put on my glasses because Zoom has not responded to my emails requesting a larger font or a font with a serif so I can see this without my glasses. But we're opening right away with a hi, Becky. My understanding is that the paleontologists really don't know how life began here on Earth 3.5 billion years ago. This suggests that it may be quite common, or it might be inconceivably rare. We just don't know. Doesn't this raise at least the possibility that in all of space and time, this may be the only place that life has arisen, and that we may be utterly alone. We're just diving into the what's his name? The Kepler? No, that's not his. You know what I'm talking about? The paradox, Fermi paradox. We're diving right
Oh,
in.
sure. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, you were intimating this before, Leanne, of how scary that is, and it's funny because it's one of the chapters in my book is what if this happens? Because I think that is so against the expectation, and in a way, it's scarier than any of the alien stories we've ever come up with. It's so hard to imagine. There was a great book about this called Rare Earth. I think it's about 20 years ago that doesn't make the point that it's that alien life doesn't exist, but that complex life is incredibly rare and functionally non-existent except for Earth. And I think it really is not only scary because we just have this inbuilt hunch, as I was saying, like we literally all personify the skies. Every culture does that. Um, but also, I just think it kind of places the responsibility much more back on us. One of the points the authors of that book make is that imagine if complex life is functionally only existing on Earth, and the way that humans treat this biodiversity right now, that's a knock on us. Like that makes it so
Huge.
much worse what's happening, right? So, obviously, I think biodiversity will outlive humans, but you know what I mean, right? This is a very to be stewards of the planet is a big kind of upshot of the idea that complex life might be rare, and it certainly, I mean, it does seem to be rare in our neighborhood, right? So, yeah, but microbes are also cool. If we have a lot of microbial planets, whatever, that's fine.
Yeah, as much as I am a huge fan of this topic, I feel like we're busy looking for other life and not taking care of the life we have. We're we're
Mhm, yeah.
we're maybe not being the best stewards. We could do a little better. I'm from the Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers School
Yeah.
of that. So, someone says here, Harvey says, maybe I'm wrong, but it appears to me that micro lensing doesn't seem to produce sharp images. If I'm correct, is their value limited in spectroscopy?
Yeah, definitely. So they kind of fill a gap. And I need to refresh myself. But what they basically do is microlensing surveys. Is they get a kind of flash of the planet, and you can get really good estimates of the mass. But it's like it's very transient, right? So it's not like you're going to find an Earth-like world for this that you can then follow up on. It's more like a large survey. So I think what people are excited about is that it's not really clear how many Earth mass worlds or things like that are out there. This is one way that that gap can be filled out. So it's more a way of like constraining other methods. So whereas transit method and things like that, and even we're starting to get direct image methods that are much better. That can tell you so much about a single world. This is telling you about the population of planets in general. So it just like once we have Roman, the surveys will be seeing the entire sky, and these little microlensing events will show where a planet lenses light from a background source. So it's just one time, but it tells you you can actually do quite a lot of interesting science just on that one kind of transient observation.
I feel like if I were to translate this into layperson's terms, it might be okay, we're going to get a shot with an iPhone. Looks interesting. Let's get back in there with an Android. I could be totally wrong.
Well, you
Uh,
can't really follow up on them. Like they're just flashes in
oh,
the.
okay.
So it's like more like, okay, we've seen a bunch of Earth-like flashes in the night, so that means that there's this amount of Earth population worlds, like Earth-like worlds out there. So that can kind of help for understanding how common Earth worlds are, or Earth-like worlds. As much as they can be like Earth. Nothing's like Earth, obviously, no place like home. But yeah,
No. Oh, I love that. That's very sweet. No place like home. Get me out of here. I, I'm waiting for the mothership as we speak. Oh, Blas is back on. Are there active efforts occurring regarding the exploration of life inside the oceans on Europa and I can't pronounce this, Enceladus? Is that right? Do you know what
Enceladus, yeah.
okay.
So
Um,
the last time, yeah, yeah. So these worlds are so fascinating. So Europa is really difficult to explore. Europa Clipper is going there, but it's my understanding that it'll be orbiting Jupiter, and it's more like a recon mission. It's not a lander or anything. Yeah, and Jupiter has so much radiation. It's a very difficult little world to actually explore. So I don't know how they're going to overcome that challenge, but I would expect that's decades out. And Enceladus, I don't know why we don't have one right now. I mean, it's literally spurting out its juice into the world. Like
that sounds
Cassini
very
did.
inappropriate.
It is. It could be it's got geysers on it, and that seem to be like yeah, squirting out water from the seas
Okay.
inside Enceladus. I don't know how else to say it. And Cassini actually already sampled these. It just didn't have a They're plumes, I should say plumes, not squirt. But that mission, wasn't set up to find life. So it was able to do some like basic chemistry, but it's possible. It's been proven that you can take a spaceship through those plumes. And so I know that there's one called Enceladus Life Finder that's been a concept mission for a while, but it's not greenlit. But that would be like, I mean, that I don't know why we don't have one. It just seems like that you don't even have to land if you have life to, this could be a place where it's just putting alien beasties into the sky if they're in the ocean. So let's go.
They're out there waving flags. Hey, I'm here, right
Yeah.
here. Look at me. Come
I
find
also
me. Let's party.
Yeah, please, hello. Yeah, exactly. And
Oh,
I also just want to say I have a section in on these these interior ice ocean worlds, which appear to be very common in our solar system. We should expect that they're common elsewhere. But what I think is interesting is if there were life in there and if it were complex or intelligent, does it know that there's a universe? I mean, it's the as landlocked as you can get. They're inside the shell of this kind of environment. So I don't know how you communicate with something that might not even know that there's a galaxy out there, which I
mm.
think is really fascinating.
I think in some way you have framed the problem that every parent of a teenager has. They have no idea that there's life outside themselves. And communicating with it
That's
is
perfect.
very difficult. So if it's in its teenage phase of development, we will have to wait.
Yes.
Um, in
Teenage ice
terms
world.
of extrasolar life, probably the only way to detect it will be via biosignatures. What, if any, criteria would be definitive biosignatures?
That's a hard one, and I think I would have to ask scientists about that. I have to yeah, kind of confess my ignorance. I think with so far, the phosphine one was an interesting biosignature because they're having trouble explaining it abiotically, but I think there are explanations. And the reason I don't want to actually go out on a limb on it is that it seems like every time there is one of these interesting components, like there's a pushback of like a bunch of people saying what the natural explanation could be. A big thing seems to be if these kind of gases and mixes of gases that are associated with life are constantly being replenished in an atmosphere, and when normally they would be just metabolized by the atmosphere or whatever. Which I think is an interesting thing on Mars. There's these methane plumes that are kind of inexplicable. Again, could have a biological or a geological explanation, and it's hard to explain why Mars would have uh, methane for any long period of time. So there's clearly something replenishing it, but um, that's the kind of line of thinking. But yeah, I think to get really technical on what would be like this is it. I don't if there was someone looking at our planet, I wonder what how, would they would assume I think that there's life based on our atmosphere, but perhaps there's a lot, and we have pollution in our atmosphere too, so maybe that would be another thing to look for is a techno signature like pollution. But I think it's hard the universe is good at making really weird combinations of gases by itself. It doesn't need life most of the time, so
Woo.
um, it's hard.
As am I, depending on what was on the menu. Wow, I went there. Why I couldn't stop myself from saying it. I wish we could edit that out. This is terrible. This is a question that I had, and thank you for asking it. What book or movie do you think best handles the various issues related to alien contact? I
Oh,
think there
that's
may be a couple
good
good ones out there, but
question.
I'd love to know your thoughts.
So my favorite alien story is the story of your life, the Ted Chiang story that was turned into Arrival, the movie, and I just think that's really
Oh,
great because it's an exploration of both the mathematical side and
yes.
it kind of uses physics to introduce a whole new worldview, this idea that a species could experience time simultaneously. So I think that's great because those aliens are very alien. They're
Very.
temporally unmoored from the arrow of time. So I think that's great in terms of trying to think about who would communicate with some kind of species that has a completely different relationship with the mathematics of the universe. I actually really like Project Hail Mary for this reason too, because there's alien characters in that haven't figured out some fundamental things that humans have. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. That aliens might be really smart in some ways, they might not have figured out some things, and that, you know, um, and that humans certainly haven't figured out a lot of things, but so those are kind of stories that I think are interesting in terms of trying to put yourself in the aliens perspective, and I love those ones.
That is, and that's called, I'm unfamiliar with that. Project Hail Mary?
Yeah, it's going to be a movie soon. It's Andy Weir's
Oh,
third novel, and it's great. It's a great book. It's fun.
okay. Angie.
Ryan
Angie.
Gosling is in the movie,
Oh,
so it'll
okay.
be
Well,
fun.
I'm in.
There you
You should have
go.
opened with that. You buried the
Yeah,
lead, my dear.
I know. I should have started. I just started with a big picture of Ryan Gosling, and that would
And
be
there we
fun.
are. There we are. Very alien friendly. I
Yeah.
don't know what that means. Um, all right, we've got a few more. I want to make sure I'm getting these in. Uh, let's see. It seems to me that a large problem with finding life outside our world is time. We here on Earth are just a blip in the cosmic timeline. Finding similar developmental timeline out there feels very spotty. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's a bummer that we're so mortal.
I
Yeah,
love that. It's a bummer we're
but
so mortal. Yes.
yeah, I
I
think
just had
that's
a
why
birthday
I would
this week
love
and
is
I
like,
agree.
yeah, I would love in general, not just an alien search for alien life, to for humans to think more multi-generationally.
Mhm.
That is a very much a part of many cultures, but I think it's been lost in this, constant now that we now exist in. And
Yes.
I think that's a way that you can kind of deal with it. Because yeah, of course, if you find like we get a say an unambiguous signal from an alien life form, but it's 1,000 light years away. Yeah, you're not going to live to see that and to see any response, right? That's going to have to be something that is a kind of version of a generation ship on Earth, right? That you really have to have it be a project that crosses many centuries. And humans are good at that. We do that a lot in our history, and I think it's beautiful. And one of the best parts about being human is being able to have this all these humans that lived before you that were smart and thought the same things and wondered the same things. But I think we need a lot more of that kind of attitude, especially with something like the search for alien life which I don't necessarily expect will be concluded in my lifetime. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we could use with a bit more longer term thinking, but again,
Yes.
very
I
difficult.
think maybe a little bit could be. I
All
mean, it
right.
might help our planet a little bit to do that. But yeah.
Okay. I've got and by this questioner's own admission, a funny, yucky question. Who doesn't
Oh,
love those? But
yeah.
also they said great presentation. I recently learned that during the Apollo 11 mission, human waste was left behind on the moon to reduce the weight for the return trip. Yeah, weight, my goodness, fellas. It was suggested that this waste could contain microbes. If so,
Mhm.
could these microbes survive on the surface of the moon?
Amazing question. I actually wrote an article for Wired last year called "Pooping
Okay.
on the Moon: Messy Business" about the poo bags on the moon.
Yikes.
I
Okay.
think everyone needs to know about the poo bags, these spent diapers and stuff like that are on the moon because you can't have, they obviously didn't want to be hauling that back. So there is a kind of a latrine there. So, and there is actually an effort to go back and sample these poo bags and see, because it would be an interesting planetary protection kind of a question. If anything has survived there, that would be like incredibly useful to know about how microbial persistence can endure in a very hostile environment. But yeah, I mean, I love the idea of going back there, and even if it died very quickly, that's useful information. But it is like a really funny little side note about the Apollo missions that there's boom there.
And now that's the movie I want to see.
Yeah,
Like there were there was some kind of rays happening, and now it's a Marvel franchise that's got to go fight the
we gotta go retrieve the poo. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
bring it back home so it
Funny.
can return to normalcy. I don't know. This
And the
is
thing is, it's funny, but it's genuinely like would be very scientifically interesting. I think there's also some heritage site concerns about that, or because
Mm,
I'm not sure the legality of it, but I think it's considered a heritage site, so I'm not sure you can take things, but it would be a very interesting question. There's also the Israeli lander that crashed on the moon a couple of years ago had tardigrades in it, so it would be interesting to know how if the tardigrades escaped their spaceship, if how long they survived.
wow. Okay.
So there's been already a couple planetary protection concerns um, with microbes on other surfaces, and I
Uh,
assume that will only accelerate.
Proof that humans can be problematic when we go somewhere and don't pick up after ourselves.
We will be humans wherever we
Humans will
go.
be humans. Yeah, which
Yeah.
is always my fear, my big concern. We are at the very top of the hour, but I want to sneak in one more question if I can. It's a little open-ended here. What is your take on UFOs? Or do you have one?
Yeah, so for the longest time, I just didn't touch this because I didn't want to do all the research and I still haven't done it. So for what I
Mhm.
think is because you really need to be full time like in that
Yes.
world and there's so much lore. Um, I think it seems to me that the humans are creating a lot of strange sightings, right? Like the fact that so much of this correlates with the dawn of the aviation and space age. But that having
Mhm.
been said, NASA did a very interesting independent study about 2 years ago, and there were a lot of really like yeah inconclusive results. I don't think personally that it's likely that they're alien in origin, but lots of other people have come to other conclusions. And in reading a lot of for this book, I really wanted to like get into the mindset of people who feel like they've experienced abduction or have met aliens or contact aliens and you know like I said wouldn't even be surprised by any kind of detection. They'd be like I've been talking to them for years. And I think there shouldn't be stigma around reporting these kinds of things, and there should be more open conversation about it. Um, because I think that you know there has been a role of like isolating people with these experiences. Now that doesn't mean you say like, oh, so you met someone from Tau Ceti, that's true now, and we're gonna print that, and this person confirmed that aliens exist. But I think that you know you shouldn't laugh down people's real sightings. And in fact, many of these sightings, especially in the 50s and 60s, were confirmed to be true. They were just you know experimental planes and things like that. Like the CIA admitted this. So that they knew at the time, like, oh, they saw one of our planes. Just tell them that they're crazy, kind of thing. So that's like not best practices. I find the whole world really interesting, but I think it's a full-time job to cover it, and it's a full-time job to cover the scientific side, and so I chose the scientific side because it's more interesting to me. But
No,
yeah.
I absolutely get it. And I know I've said this often, but if you've been on Tinder, you've experienced the same
Really?
thing. No, I'm just
Really?
saying it's a wild scene over there. I'm like, are y'all from here? What is happening? Have you
Yeah.
really studied humans enough to interact with us properly? I don't think so. But Becky, I want to thank you so much for being on Skeptical Inquirer Presents. You were delightful. There were lots of comments or compliments in the chat. So thank you for your presentation, and I wish you the best of luck when your book comes out. I hope you do all the podcasts and all the things.
Thank
Um,
you so much. What
and
a
I
wait.
just want to let the oh no, of course. And if to the audience, if you know the deal, if you've missed any of tonight's presentation, it has been recorded and will be available at skepticalinquirer.org. And my thanks, as always, goes out to Skeptical Inquirer, to the Center for Inquiry, and of course to all of you in the audience for choosing to spend your time with us. We appreciate it. And my name is Leanne Lord. Until next time, thank you and good night. Becky, good night. Thank you so much for being with us again.
Have a great one.
Bye.